Have you ever felt like the walls are closing in, even when you're surrounded by luxury, like a beautiful painting hiding a dark secret? This is the story of Charles, a man who had everything, but trusted no one. Prepare to dive into a world of wealth, suspicion, and the desperate search for something real. Charles surveyed his opulent living room. Sunlight streamed through the massive windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, each one a tiny reminder of the relentless passage of time. He was surrounded by priceless art, plush furniture, and the quiet hum of a perfectly climate-controlled environment. A fortress of gold, some might say. But to Charles it was just a gilded cage. He was a billionaire, yes, but the price of his success had been steep. Betrayal. It was a word etched into his soul, a constant echo of a past relationship that had shattered his ability to trust. Now even his engagement to Eleanor, a stunning woman who moved with effortless grace and charm, felt like another potential trap. Eleanor. She was beautiful, undeniably so, a socialite, accustomed to the finer things in life. She moved through his mansion like she owned it, her laughter echoing through the halls. But Charles couldn't shake the feeling that her affection was conditional, tied to the vastness of his fortune. He watched her closely. Her interactions with the staff, the way she tilted her head and smiled at Gilbert, his driver, seemed calculated. Gilbert was a loyal employee, a quiet, unassuming man who had been with him for years. Yet, Eleanor's overly friendly demeanor towards him sparked a flicker of unease in Charles's already suspicious mind. And then there were her questions. Always subtle, always veiled in concern, but always circling back to his finances. "Charles, darling, are you sure that investment is sound? Are you feeling all right? You've been working so hard it must be taking a toll on your assets." Each inquiry chipped away at his composure, feeding his growing paranoia. He found himself spending hours lost in thought, replaying conversations, analyzing gestures, searching for hidden meanings. Sleep offered little respite, haunted by nightmares of his past heartbreak, twisted and amplified by his present anxieties. He was trapped in a labyrinth of his own making, a prisoner of his own distrust. One evening, as Gilbert drove him home from a particularly grueling meeting, Charles found himself unable to contain his anxieties any longer. The city lights blurred past the window, reflecting in the polished surface of the limousine, mimicking the distorted reality within his own mind. "Gilbert," Charles began, his voice rough with emotion, Have you noticed anything unusual about Miss Eleanor?" Gilbert, usually so reserved, glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable. "Unusual, sir?" Charles hesitated. How could he explain his suspicions, his fears, without sounding like a raving lunatic? Just her behavior, her questions. Does she seem genuinely interested in me, or something else?" The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Finally Gilbert spoke, his voice low and steady. "Sir, I've been working for you for a long time. I've seen a lot of things, and I've learned that sometimes the things we see aren't always what they seem." Charles leaned forward, his heart pounding in his chest. "What do you mean, Gilbert?" Gilbert hesitated again, then pulled the car over to the side of the road. He turned to face Charles, his eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "Sir, if you don't mind me saying so, you seem troubled. And sometimes when we're troubled, we see things that aren't really there. But sometimes our instincts are right." Charles stared at him, a glimmer of hope flickering in the darkness of his despair. He had been so consumed by his own paranoia, so isolated in his distrust, that he hadn't considered confiding in anyone. But in that moment, looking into Gilbert's honest eyes, he saw a flicker of loyalty, a spark of something genuine. "Gilbert," Charles said, his voice barely a whisper, I think I need your help." What secrets will Gilbert reveal? And can Charles, blinded by his past, learn to trust again? Charles sat heavily in his study, the fire crackling in the hearth doing little to warm the chill that had settled in his bones. Gilbert's words echoed. "Sometimes our instincts are right." He paced, the plush carpet muffling his steps. He needed proof, undeniable proof of Eleanor's true intentions. The thought of another betrayal, another Lorena, tightened his chest. He stopped abruptly, an idea forming, audacious and risky. He needed to gauge Eleanor's reaction when he was at his most vulnerable. "Gilbert," Charles said, his voice gaining strength, "I have a plan." Gilbert, ever attentive, appeared in the doorway. "Sir, I'm going to feign paralysis." Gilbert's eyebrows shot up. "Paralysis, sir? Are you certain? That's quite extreme. I need to know, Gilbert. I need to know if she's with me, or for my money. If I'm helpless, then I'll see her true colors." Gilbert frowned, his loyalty warring with his concern. "Sir, with all due respect, this is a dangerous game. What if she sees through it? What if it backfires? And more importantly, what if it works? The emotional toll. Charles waved a dismissive hand. I'm prepared for the risks. I need to do this. I need to know. Gilbert sighed, knowing there was no arguing with Charles when he was in this state. Very well, sir, but I still think you should reconsider. Later, as Charles sat alone, Martha entered quietly, carrying a tray with tea and biscuits. She placed it on the table, her eyes filled with concern. Mr. Huntington, you seem troubled, Martha said gently. Is everything all right? Charles hesitated. He hadn't intended to burden Martha with his anxieties, but her genuine kindness was a balm to his wounded soul. Martha, he began, I'm not sure who to trust anymore. Martha sat beside him, her presence a quiet comfort. Sometimes, sir, the hardest thing to do is to trust, but it's also the most important. Not everyone is like her. She didn't need to say Lorena's name. The wound was still too raw. I have a plan, Charles confessed, the words tumbling out. A risky one. I'm going to pretend to be paralyzed to see Eleanor's true feelings. Martha's eyes widened. Oh, Mr. Huntington, that's a great risk. Are you sure this is the right way? I don't know, Martha, but I need to be certain. Martha took his hand, her touch surprisingly firm. Mr. Huntington, you are a good man, a kind man. Don't let one bad apple spoil the whole bunch. There are people who care about you, truly care. Don't let your fear blind you to that. Her words, simple and heartfelt, resonated within him. He looked at Martha, her honest eyes filled with genuine concern, and a flicker of warmth ignited in his chest. Thank you, Martha, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Your words mean more to me than you know. He turned back to Gilbert, who had been waiting patiently by the door. Gilbert, prepare the arrangements. I'm going through with it. Gilbert nodded grimly, his face etched with worry. As you wish, sir. But please be careful. This could be a dangerous game indeed. Charles looked into the fire, the flames reflecting in his determined eyes. He knew the risks. He knew the potential for heartbreak. But he also knew that he couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. He had to be certain, no matter the cost. The charade would begin tomorrow. The next morning dawned grey, mirroring the storm brewing inside Charles. He woke with a knot in his stomach, the weight of the deception pressing down on him. This was it. There was no turning back. He had crossed the Rubicon. Gilbert arrived early, his face grim. He helped Charles out of bed, carefully maneuvering him into the wheelchair. The simple act felt surreal, a dress rehearsal for a life he prayed he wouldn't actually have to live. Are you sure about this, sir? Gilbert asked, his voice low. It's not too late to change your mind. Charles clenched his jaw. No, Gilbert, I have to do this. I have to know. He wheeled himself into the dining room, where Martha was already setting the table. She looked up, her eyes widening with concern as she saw him in the chair. Mr. Huntington, what happened? She exclaimed, rushing to his side. Charles forced a weak smile. An accident, Martha. A fall. I can't feel my legs. He hated the lie, the way it twisted in his gut, but he pressed on. He had to. Martha's face crumpled with sympathy. Oh, Mr. Huntington, I'm so sorry. Is there anything I can do? Just be here, Martha. That's all I need. Eleanor entered the room, her expression a carefully constructed mask of concern. Charles, what happened? Gilbert told me you had an accident. She rushed to his side, placing a hand on his arm. Her touch felt different, colder. I'm fine, Eleanor, he said, his voice strained. Just a little setback. He watched her carefully, searching for a flicker of genuine emotion in her eyes. He saw only a practiced concern. The next few days were a blur of forced smiles and labored movements. Charles played the part of the helpless invalid, relying on Eleanor, Gilbert, and Martha for everything. It was exhausting both physically and emotionally. He felt vulnerable, exposed, like a puppet with his strings being pulled by others. Helena took on the role of the devoted fiancée, tending to his needs with a practiced efficiency. She brought him his meals, helped him with his exercises, and read to him in the evenings. But something felt off. Her eyes seemed distant, her attention elsewhere. He began to notice things he hadn't before. Her increasingly frequent absences, the hushed phone calls she took in the hallway, the way she avoided his gaze when he asked her about her day. Each observation chipped away at his heart, confirming his worst fears. One afternoon, while Eleanor was supposedly running errands, Charles asked Gilbert to help him to the study. He wanted to check Eleanor's email to see if he could find any clues to her behavior. Gilbert hesitated. Sir, I don't think that's a good idea. It's an invasion of privacy. I know, Gilbert, Charles said, his voice pleading, but I have to. I can't live like this, wondering if the woman I'm about to marry is betraying me. Gilbert sighed, his loyalty warring with his conscience. "All right, sir, but I don't want to be a part of this." He helped Charles into the study and positioned him in front of the computer. Charles's hands trembled as he typed in Eleanor's password. He scrolled through her inbox, his heart pounding in his chest. Most of the emails were mundane: shopping receipts, appointment reminders, messages from friends. But then he saw one that caught his eye. It was from an unknown address with the subject line "Meeting." He clicked on the email, his breath catching in his throat. The message was short and cryptic, but it sent a chill down his spine. Confirmed. Saturday at the usual place. Don't forget the details. Charles closed the email, his mind racing. Saturday? The usual place? What details? A cold dread washed over him. He looked up to see Eleanor standing in the doorway, her face pale and drawn. She must have come home early. "Charles," she said, her voice trembling, "what are you doing?" He swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet her gaze. The game was up. He could feel it. "I think I know what's going on, Eleanor," he said, his voice dangerously low, "and I want you to tell me the truth." Eleanor's eyes darted around the room, searching for an escape. He knew he had her cornered. The suspense was palpable, thick with the weight of unspoken words and hidden betrayals. He just had to wait for the inevitable. His heart ached, but his resolve hardened. He would get to the truth. He watched her carefully, noting the rise and fall of her chest, the way her fingers fidgeted nervously. He could almost see the wheels turning in her mind as she calculated her next move. This was it, the moment of truth, the crossroads where their relationship would either be salvaged or shattered beyond repair. He braced himself, ready for whatever she was about to say. But even as he prepared for the worst, a tiny flicker of hope remained. Maybe, just maybe, he was wrong. Maybe she could explain everything. Maybe, against all odds, there was still a chance for them. But deep down, he knew. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, in the tightness in his chest. Eleanor was hiding something, and he was about to find out what it was. The air crackled with tension as Eleanor opened her mouth to speak. Her words hung in the balance, poised to either confirm his deepest fears or offer a glimmer of hope. The stakes had never been higher, and Charles knew that his life and his heart would never be the same again. Eleanor's words caught in her throat. Charles watched, a coldness settling over him. "What is it, Eleanor? What aren't you telling me?" She stammered. "Charles, it's nothing. Just work." "Work?" He raised an eyebrow, his voice laced with disbelief. "Is that why you were so secretive with your phone? Is that why you looked like you'd seen a ghost when I asked about the email?" He paused, letting the silence amplify the tension. "Don't insult my intelligence, Eleanor. I know you're lying." Eleanor's facade began to crumble. Tears welled in her eyes, but Charles remained unmoved. He'd seen those tears before. He'd believed them before. He wouldn't make that mistake again. Meanwhile, Gilbert, discreet as ever, relayed his observations to Charles later that evening. "Sir, I saw Miss Eleanor meeting with a lawyer today, a Mr. Davies, known for handling messy divorces and asset protection." Charles felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Asset protection. The words echoed the suspicions that had been gnawing at him for weeks. He thanked Gilbert, his voice tight. Gilbert's unwavering loyalty was a stark contrast to Eleanor's deceit. It was becoming clearer and clearer who he could truly depend on. That night, Martha brought Charles his dinner. She noticed his troubled expression. "Is everything all right, Mr. Huntington?" she asked, her voice filled with genuine concern. Charles sighed. "It's Eleanor, Martha. I think she's been lying to me." Martha hesitated, then said softly, "I've noticed she's not always as kind as she seems, Mr. Huntington, especially when she thinks you're not around. I've seen the way she speaks to you sometimes, like you're a burden." Charles's heart sank. He had hoped he was wrong, but Martha's words confirmed his worst fears. He looked at Martha, her kind eyes filled with sympathy, and felt a warmth spread through him. Her loyalty, her unwavering support was a lifeline in this sea of deception. He spent the next few days immersed in his charade, pretending to be oblivious, while Gilbert and Martha quietly gathered information. He watched Eleanor, her every move scrutinized, her every word dissected. The more he observed, the more convinced he became that he was right. One afternoon, Gilbert rushed into the study, his face grim. "Sir, I managed to get a copy of the documents Miss Eleanor was discussing with Mr. Davies. It seems she's been transferring funds to an offshore account." Charles's blood ran cold. He felt a wave of anger, a profound sense of betrayal, and a searing sense of foolishness wash over him. He had been so blinded by his desire for companionship that he had ignored the obvious warning signs. Martha placed a comforting hand on his arm. "Mr. Huntington, you're not alone. We're here for you." He looked at Martha and Gilbert, their faces etched with concern and loyalty. He realized that in his quest to uncover Eleanor's deception, he had found something far more valuable: genuine friendship. He saw them not just as employees, but as allies, as people who truly cared about him. For the first time in a long time, Charles felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't entirely alone. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you both." The evidence continued to mount. Gilbert discovered emails detailing Eleanor's plans to leave the country once she had secured her financial gains. Martha overheard a phone conversation where Eleanor referred to Charles as a fool and a cash cow. With each new revelation, Charles's heart hardened. The pain was still there, but it was now tempered with a steely resolve. He would not be a victim. He would expose Eleanor for who she truly was. One evening, Gilbert and Martha presented Charles with a final piece of evidence: a photograph of Eleanor embracing another man. The man was the same lawyer Gilbert had seen her with, Mr. Davies. The photograph was taken outside a jewelry store, and Eleanor was wearing a diamond necklace that Charles had never seen before. The photograph was the final blow. Charles felt a strange sense of calm wash over him. The charade was over. It was time to confront Eleanor. He knew what he had to do. He looked at Gilbert and Martha, their faces filled with concern and anticipation. "I think it's time we had a little chat with Eleanor," Charles said, a dangerous glint in his eyes. "And this time, there will be no more lies." He knew the confrontation would be explosive, but he was ready. He had Gilbert and Martha by his side, and that was all that mattered. He would expose Eleanor's betrayal and reclaim his life. The end was near. Gilbert stood awkwardly in the study doorway, his hands clasped nervously. Charles, still in his wheelchair, looked up. His eyes narrowed. "What is it, Gilbert?" Gilbert cleared his throat. I found something, sir, while cleaning Miss Eleanor's car." Charles's gaze sharpened. He gestured with a trembling hand. "Show me." Gilbert approached cautiously, placing a thin folded document on the mahogany desk. It was tucked under the seat. "I almost missed it." Charles unfolded the paper, his brow furrowing as he read. It was an amendment to their prenuptial agreement, an amendment that transferred a vast portion of his assets to Eleanor upon his death or incapacitation, and it was signed by Eleanor and a man whose signature Charles didn't recognize. But the name typed beneath it sent a chill down his spine. Mr. Davies. The photograph, the jewelry, the whispered conversations, it all slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. He felt the air leave his lungs, a suffocating wave of betrayal washing over him. "This," Charles rasped, his voice barely a whisper. He looked at Gilbert, his eyes filled with a pain that threatened to consume him. She was planning this all along." Gilbert stepped forward, his face etched with concern. "I'm so sorry, sir." Charles shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. "Sorry? I've been a fool, a blind, trusting fool." He slammed his fist on the desk, the sound echoing in the silent room. "But no more, this ends now." He looked up at Gilbert, his eyes now blazing with a fierce determination. "I want Mr. Davies's background investigated. Everything. Where he lives, who he works for, everything." Gilbert nodded, his loyalty unwavering. "Of course, sir, I'll get right on it." Martha entered the study, her face etched with worry. "Charles, I heard the commotion. Is everything all right?" Charles looked at her, his expression softening slightly. He couldn't tell her everything yet, not with Eleanor still in the house, but he needed her support. "I've discovered something disturbing, Martha, something that changes everything." Martha moved closer, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Whatever it is, Charles, you're not alone. We're here for you." Her words were a lifeline, a reminder that he wasn't completely isolated. He looked at Gilbert, then at Martha, their faces filled with genuine concern. He had been so focused on Eleanor's deception that he had almost overlooked the unwavering loyalty of the people who had been by his side all along. "I need your help," Charles said, his voice regaining its strength. "I need both of you to help me expose Eleanor and reclaim my life." Gilbert and Martha exchanged a look of understanding. "Anything, Charles," Gilbert said firmly. Martha simply nodded, her eyes filled with a quiet determination. Charles leaned back in his wheelchair, a plan beginning to form in his mind. He wouldn't let Eleanor get away with this. He would expose her treachery, not just to him, but to everyone. He would use her own greed against her. "My birthday party is next week," Charles said, a cold smile playing on his lips. "It seems like the perfect opportunity for a little revelation." He paused, his eyes glinting with anticipation. "We have a lot of work to do." The shadows in the study seemed to deepen, concealing the intricate web of deceit and betrayal that had been woven around Charles. But in the heart of the darkness, a spark of hope flickered. fueled by the unexpected loyalty of two unlikely allies. The game had changed, and Charles Huntington was ready to play. He looked at Gilbert and Martha, and he knew for the first time in a long time he wasn't alone. The road ahead would be difficult, perhaps even dangerous, but he was ready. He had a plan, and he had people he could trust. The party was set. The stage was ready. The curtain was about to rise. The grand ballroom of Huntington Manor buzzed with the forced cheer of Charles's birthday party. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow on the elegantly dressed guests, oblivious to the storm brewing beneath the surface. Charles, seemingly frail in his wheelchair, surveyed the scene with narrowed eyes. Eleanor, radiant in a shimmering gown, hovered attentively beside him, her smile as fake as the diamonds adorning her neck. He caught Martha's eye across the room. She stood near the entrance, a quiet observer, her presence a silent promise of support. Gilbert stood a little behind her, ever watchful. Charles gave them a barely perceptible nod. It was time. "My dearest friends and family," Charles began, his voice surprisingly strong, silencing the room. Eleanor squeezed his hand, her smile widening. "I have an announcement to make, something that has come to my attention recently." He paused, letting the tension build. "As you know, I have been indisposed these last few months. A difficult time made bearable by the love and support of my fiancée, Eleanor." He looked at her, his gaze cold and unwavering. "Or so I thought." Eleanor's smile faltered slightly. "Charles, darling, what is this about?" Charles ignored her. "I recently came across a document, a rather revealing document." He signaled to Gilbert, who stepped forward and handed Charles a folder. He extracted a crisp, official-looking paper. "This, my friends, is a detailed account of Eleanor's, shall we say, business dealings with my lawyer, Mr. Davies." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Charles continued, his voice gaining strength. "It outlines a rather elaborate scheme to relieve me of my fortune, after, of course, I conveniently passed away." Eleanor's face paled. "This is absurd. Charles, you're not well. You're imagining things." "Am I?" Charles countered, his voice laced with steel. "Perhaps you'd like to explain the numerous transfers of funds from Huntington Investments to offshore accounts under Davies' control, or the passionate letters detailing your affair." He tossed copies of the documents into the air, letting them flutter to the floor. Panic flared in Eleanor's eyes. She turned to Martha, who stood frozen in place, her face etched with sadness. "She's lying. This woman is trying to poison his mind against me." Eleanor lunged towards Martha, her manicured nails extended like claws. You've been whispering lies in his ear. I'll make you pay." Without thinking, Charles reacted. He shot up from his wheelchair, his legs strong and steady, knocking the table beside him with a crash. The room erupted in shocked silence. "Don't you dare touch her," Charles roared, his voice filled with a protective fury no one had ever heard before. He stood tall, no longer the frail, helpless invalid. He was Charles Huntington, and he would not allow Eleanor to harm Martha. Eleanor stumbled back, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. You were faking it. All this time." Charles ignored her, his attention solely on Martha, making sure she was unharmed. He reached out, gently taking her hand. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice softening. Martha nodded, her eyes filled with a mixture of shock and relief. "I'm fine, Charles." The revelation of his deception, the risk he had taken, all faded into insignificance compared to the fear he had felt for Martha's safety. In that moment, he understood the depth of his feelings for her, a love born of loyalty and genuine connection, not greed and deceit. He had been so blinded by his past that he almost missed the real thing standing right in front of him. Eleanor, realizing the game was up, let out a scream of pure frustration. "You'll regret this, Charles. You'll all regret this." As security guards, alerted by Gilbert, escorted Eleanor from the room, Charles looked at Martha, his eyes filled with a newfound vulnerability. He had risked everything, exposed himself completely, all to protect her. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't imagine facing it without her. The supreme ordeal had not only revealed Eleanor's treachery, but had also unveiled the depth of his own heart. The police arrived shortly after, taking Eleanor into custody. The grand ballroom, moments ago filled with laughter and music, was now silent, save for the hushed whispers of bewildered guests. Charles, still standing, felt a wave of exhaustion wash over him. The charade was over. The truth was out. But the journey was far from finished. Charles stood in the ballroom, the scene of Eleanor's unmasking replaying in his mind. The police were gone, taking Eleanor with them. The whispers of the remaining guests faded as they slowly began to depart. Gilbert stood nearby, a silent guardian. Martha, her hand still gently held in Charles's, looked at him with a mixture of concern and relief. "It's over," Charles said, his voice raspy. Martha squeezed his hand. "It is, Charles, and you were very brave." Brave? He didn't feel brave. He felt empty, but also, strangely, lighter. The weight of suspicion and carefully constructed defenses he'd carried for so long had begun to lift. The next few days were a blur of legal proceedings and public relations damage control. Charles, however, found himself surprisingly detached from it all. He instructed his lawyers to cooperate fully with the authorities regarding Eleanor's fraudulent activities. He wanted no part of the life he had so meticulously built with her. He started with the mansion. Huntington Manor, a symbol of his wealth and isolation, felt like a prison. He called a realtor and put it on the market. The asking price was exorbitant, but Charles didn't care. He wanted it gone. "Are you sure about this, Mr. Huntington?" the realtor asked, clearly surprised. "Absolutely," Charles replied, his voice firm. "Sell it, quickly." Next, he contacted his financial advisors. He instructed them to liquidate a significant portion of his assets. "I want to donate it," he said, "to local charities. Focus on programs that support education and community development." His advisors were stunned. "But, Mr. Huntington, this is substantial. Are you certain?" Charles nodded. "More certain than I've been about anything in a long time." He moved out of Huntington Manor even before it sold. He found a smaller, more modest house in a quiet neighborhood. It was nothing like the opulent mansion he was used to, but it felt right. It had a small garden, a cozy living room, and a kitchen that Martha immediately began to make her own. He found himself spending more time with Gilbert and Martha. He'd always appreciated their loyalty, but now he saw it with new eyes. They weren't after his money or his status. They were simply there, for him. One evening, Charles sat in the living room with Gilbert, a chessboard between them. Gilbert, as usual, was winning. "You know," Charles said, moving a pawn, "I never really understood what friendship meant." Gilbert chuckled. "Took you long enough, boss." Charles smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Yeah, well, I'm a slow learner." He turned to Martha, who was knitting by the fireplace. "And Martha," he continued, "I don't know how to thank you for everything. For your loyalty, your kindness." Martha looked up, her eyes warm. "You don't have to thank me, Charles. I care about you." That night, Charles slept soundly for the first time in years. The nightmares of his past betrayal still lingered, but they were less vivid, less terrifying. He was starting to heal. He began to shed the layers of cynicism and distrust that had defined him for so long. He started saying yes more often. Yes to Martha's invitations to try new recipes. Yes to Gilbert's suggestions for walks in the park. Yes to simple pleasures he had previously dismissed as unimportant. He started to see the world differently. He noticed the beauty of a sunset, the laughter of children playing in the street, the kindness of strangers. He was rediscovering the joy in everyday life. One afternoon, while visiting the local community center, Charles noticed a group of children struggling to learn to code on outdated computers. He overheard a teacher lamenting the lack of funding for new equipment. An idea sparked in his mind. He could help. He wanted to help. He approached the teacher. "Excuse me," he said, "I might be able to assist with that." The teacher looked at him, surprised. "Really? How?" Charles smiled. "I'm Charles Huntington, and I'd like to invest in this project." The relief, the gratitude in the teacher's eyes, was all the reward Charles needed. He was finally using his wealth for something meaningful, something that made a real difference. He was building a new life, a life based on trust, connection, and giving back. The pieces of his broken past were slowly being picked up, reshaped into something stronger, something better. He was, at long last, truly free. Charles felt a surge of purpose as he finalized the details for the community center's new technology lab. Seeing the children's faces light up at the prospect of learning on modern equipment was more rewarding than any business deal he had ever closed. He was resurrected, reborn not as a titan of industry, but as a benefactor, a friend, a neighbor. He made a point of including Gilbert and Martha in every decision. He sought their advice, valued their opinions, and made sure they understood that he considered them equals. Gone was the aloof, demanding employer. In his place stood a man who saw the worth in every individual, regardless of their background or social standing. He gifted Gilbert a new, reliable car, not as a payment for service, but as a token of genuine appreciation for his unwavering friendship. He shared his financial plans with Martha, seeking her input on how best to allocate resources for the community projects. One evening, as they sat on the porch of his modest home, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues, Charles turned to Martha. "You know," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I used to think that wealth was the key to happiness, but I was wrong. True wealth isn't about money. It's about the connections we make, the love we share, the lives we touch." He paused, gathering his courage. "Martha," he continued, his eyes meeting hers, I care for you deeply. More than I ever thought possible. You and Gilbert have shown me the true meaning of loyalty and friendship. You've helped me heal, helped me to become a better man." Martha's eyes welled up with tears. She reached out and took his hand, her touch gentle and reassuring. "Charles," she said softly, "I care for you too. And Gilbert, we both just want you to be happy." Charles realized that his journey was far from over, but he had finally found his way. He had learned to trust again, to open his heart to the possibility of love. He began to share his story with others, speaking at community events and schools, urging people to overcome their fears and insecurities, to embrace vulnerability, and to believe in the power of human connection. He became an advocate for trust, a beacon of hope for those who had been hurt. He had found his wisdom, not through a magical potion, but through the understanding that true strength lies not in isolation, but in connection, in compassion, and in love. He and Martha began a relationship, cautiously at first, but with each passing day, their bond grew stronger, built on a foundation of mutual respect, understanding, and unwavering trust. They spent their days working together on community projects, helping those in need, and sharing their newfound joy with others. Gilbert remained a constant presence, offering his support and friendship, a silent guardian of their happiness. Eleanor's actions had caused immense pain, but they had also inadvertently set Charles on a path of transformation, a journey of self-discovery that had led him to a place of profound peace. He had lost his fortune, but he had gained something far more valuable, a life filled with love, purpose, and genuine connection. Years later, Charles, Martha, and Gilbert stood together at the grand opening of the Huntington Community Center, a testament to their shared vision and unwavering commitment to helping others. As Charles looked around at the smiling faces, he knew that he had finally come home. He had found his purpose, his family, and his true self. He had learned that the greatest legacy one could leave behind was not one of wealth and power, but one of trust, compassion, and love. The sun set, casting a warm glow over the community, a legacy of trust built by a man who had once lost it all. He was finally free.